Thank you for inviting me. Sorry we can't meet in person. I feel that I'm a much better face-to-face speaker than on Zoom. Um, as you can see here from this initial slide, I've kind of slightly altered the title of my presentation. I kind of wanted to bring to the fore some of the recent work that we're doing right now, and so I've kind of eliminated San Juan del Puerto, and I've added something a little bit different. All right. So just a background on the area. So the Mocama speaking Timucua that I'm going to talk about tonight, they first kind of emerged in the documents of Europeans with the arrival of the French in 1562. And at this point in time, there seems to be a miscommunication, and this word Timagona comes about. And it probably is a name of somebody who is a Timucua speaker farther to the south. But this, to a misunderstanding, seems to become the word that they use to refer to these people, Timucua. We don't know what their self-identifying term is, so I can't really use that. So what we tend to use is the dialect that was spoken within this area. So Timucua is actually a language. And so the Timucua language would really spread over about a 19,000 square mile area of northern Peninsula Florida, then into southeastern Georgia. And as you can see here, this is going to cover a lot of landscapes. It's basically from the estuaries and the coastline to the river, to the lakes, to the inner lacustrine areas, all the way to the Okefenokee Swamp, and to the beginning of the Panhandle. So really a lot of diverse groups in here. There's not one united political structure. There are smaller polities throughout the area and groups of polities. What we see is these inter-Timucua groups were involved in alliances. They were also involved in an internecine warfare. So it's a really dynamic landscape in the 16th century. And then you throw the French and the Spanish into this, and it becomes really, really volatile. So the area I want to talk about is Mocama speakers. So Mocama is the maritime dialect of the Timucua language. And it does appear to differ from the saltwater or Agua Salada dialect, which was spoken a little bit farther south in the St. Augustine area. Aaron Broadwell, who's at the University of Florida, is really doing this great research on the Timucuan language, and he's really starting to bring it to life. So there are about, as he states, about 2,000 pages of bilingual Spanish Timucua text that he's going through now and really gaining insights into various aspects of Timucuan life. So the Spanish arrived in 1565. The French are here with La Caroline colony for like 15 months. The French kind of evict them from the area. They decide to stay and kind of take over the area. Eventually, they will start missionization among the indigenous people of La Florida, as they call it, in 1587. We see earlier attempts by the Jesuits and other secular priests, but really the main mission system is the Franciscans, which in our area of northeastern Florida runs from about 1587 to 1702. You're probably familiar with the mission system. It's basically really kind of this narrow section of coastline of northern Florida and Georgia initially. So initially we have the Wally and the Mocama groups, and these become provinces in Spanish parlance. So both of these late 1580s, early 1590s. By 1607, they move into the interior, into Timucua. What we do see in the documents is Timucua actually becomes the term to refer to the people in the hinterlands, in the interior part of Florida and into Georgia that are Timucua speakers. While on the coast, they tend to use more Mocama, even though broadly they'll talk about the Timucua language. And then by 1530s, we see that missionization has pushed all the way into the Appalachian territory. So really, it's just this missionization is just this little swath along the Tidewater zone, north of St. Augustine into Georgia, then kind of across the northern part of Florida into the Panhandle. All right. This differs from that of California. Most people, when they think of missions, they think of California, Texas, and the Alamo, the Southwest. But as you can see within California, it's much later in time and it's shorter here. So the mission system in southeastern U.S. was really larger and much earlier in time. I think it's lost a lot of times through history because we lack the standing structures and the ruins that you see within California, because all of these structures that were built by the indigenous peoples of La Florida would have been made more out of thatch and wood and other perishable materials, so we don't see their ruins throughout the landscape as you do in California. All right, so the main tidewater zone groups that I'm going to talk about are going to be the Mocama, but just north of the Mocama are the Wale. So this kind of gives you an idea of where these two groups are situated. Traditionally, there was probably a little buffer zone in between them, but the Mocama would have been, at least the northernmost Mocama, they seem to have been enemies, with the Wale. All right. So a couple other terms before we start really getting into everything is Spanish missions. Okay. I think Jerry Milanich sums it up perfectly when he says missions were colonialism. All right. So the goal of colonialism was to create profits by really exploiting indigenous people and indigenous lands. But really the mission system went beyond just, religious conversion. It was a economic system that was well structured, in which indigenous people provided the labor and they provided surplus foods that really built the infrastructure of the colony and enabled the colony really to survive. So the way that it worked within La Florida, they didn't build missions and then hope that the indigenous people would come to them. Rather, they basically looked at the existing indigenous political structure that was there and grafted onto that. So there would be maybe in an area such as northeastern Florida, a series of communities, a series of villages or towns, and there would be some that would be higher ranked or higher status than others. They would try to basically graft onto one of those. And typically the way it worked is that the priest from one of these communities would basically go to St. Augustine and pledge their obedience to the crown, and through that would invite a priest to come live with them. Okay. So in the eyes of the Spanish, that was that the priest and the community were now ready to accept baptism, ready to accept conversion, into Catholicism. But I think that likely mission communities and residents engaged Catholicism on their own terms in varying ways and to varying degrees. We really don't know what conversion meant to the indigenous people. We know what it meant to the Spanish. Basically, a lot of the friars is once they're baptized, that's basically meaning they're converted. Okay. So really, we're not sure how this plays out with the indigenous people of these areas. So they invite a priest into the community. Okay. That community really doesn't change, except they build a friary for the priest to live in, and then they build a church. Okay. Right here, the council house stays. And I think this is an important feature. The council house, which was the political center of their communities prior to European contact, at European contact, and throughout the mission period, stayed. So what we see, the internal politics that went on, stayed within the confines of the chiefs, their counselors, and the people within those communities. Right. Outside of the doctrina, I should mention that the term the Spanish use in Spanish parlance, where that priest is living, is called a doctrina. All right, so that's where the church is, that's where he lives, and then he is ministering, proselytizing to a group of communities surrounding it. Okay, he states that usually that he visits those on a semi-regular basis. So they're referred to as the Sifters within the Spanish parlance. All right, so in our area, we know that in 1602 there are 9 of these communities that he visits, but by 1630 they're all gone. So those communities are either been reduced to the missions and moved to the mission community, or some of those people have gone. So there's probably a little bit of both things going on. There's going to be out migration and fleeing of the area. There's probably going to be decline due to the structural violence of the mission system, due to epidemics. So some of those probably stay, move into the missions, others leave the area. All right. So just to give you a quick idea of what it looks like along the landscape of the Mocama province. This is what we have. In 1587, 2 communities, Alamacani, which is at the mouth of the St. Johns River, and Takatakaroo, which is on Cumberland Island, Georgia. Both of them seek the service of a friar to come live with them. Okay, we don't know exactly what that means, but they're inviting a friar to come live with them. So the friar moves into those communities and establishes it. So Alamacani becomes San Juan del Puerto, and Takatakaroo becomes San Pedro de Mocama. So these are one of the earliest missions among the Franciscan chain along the Atlantic coast. What we see here by probably about 1607, maybe 1608, two more missions that are Mocama emerged. And we know these are Mocama missions is that when the governors or other officials go to visit them, they usually have scribes with them and they record what's going on, and usually they'll list the translator, and the translator will let us know if it's Wale or if it's Mocama. So we know that there are four now. So by the first decade of the 17th century, there are four, okay? The most northern one, keep this one in mind, this one way up here, this is on St. Simon's Island, Georgia, and this is San Buenaventura de Guadalquivir. We think that this might have been actually Temuco speakers who were in this area here, who are going to be moved to the south end, really to kind of fill in the ferry chain for movement along the coast. Okay, what we're going to see here is a slow contraction of missions, the reduction of Mocama people, like I said, through structural violence, through epidemics, through outmigration. We're also going to see the English move into the area, which is going to create this dynamic as well. So then what we see, 1655, San Pedro de Mocama, which was the chief Mocama community during this early mission period, abandons their mission and they move to Santa Maria de Sena. So they just moved down one. All right. So by the middle part of the 1600, we're down to three. Within 10 years, Santa Maria de Sena, which also contains remnants of San Pedro de Mocama, they moved into San Juan del Puerto. So now, 1665, we're down to two missions. And there doesn't appear to be any Mocama settlements in between them. That the Mocama who are there have moved into the missions or moved out of the area. Then what we're going to see here is this movement in 1684 of San Buenaventura de Guadalquivir down to near San Juan del Puerto. Factors for this are twofold. One is the English have established the Charlestown community or the Carolina colony. So they begin raiding Spanish missions for slaves. All right. And so basically we see this kind of widespread retreat from the North Georgia coast of the missions, both the Mocama missions and the Wale missions just in the north, to get away from this. We also see that there is going to be assaults by French corsairs, French pirates. So an incredibly dynamic time. An interesting move here, the Spanish government wants Guadalquivir to move into San Juan del Puerto. They say, hey, you speak the same language, we want you two to combine. Guadalquivir chief says, no, we want to maintain our own political autonomy. So we're not going to move in there and become kind of subject to them. So they move nearby. And this is going to become important for my talk here because we found Guadalquivir. Now, Guadalquivir only lasts 12 years in this location, all right? And basically, Guadalquivir eventually does move to San Juan del Puerto. So it's there for 12 years. So 1696, those missions and those scores of Mocama communities are now reduced to one community of San Juan del Puerto, all right? But this one community is only going to last 6 more years. And so what we see happen now at this point in time is that British slave raiders, or at least British-sponsored slave raiders with indigenous allies, come and start attacking both the Wale missions that have moved into North Florida and the Mocama mission of San Juan del Puerto. They hear about this and they're able to escape, but it basically ends in 1702. All right. They come back a couple of years later and they try to establish a community right here called Pila. So this is this great map that dates to probably 1704 or 1705, which is just after the destruction of the coastal mission chain and their attempt to have a short-lived community back in this area. What it does show is right here, this is the island of San Juan. So this is where San Juan del Puerto would have been. This here is the Isle of Santa Maria. So this is where the mission of Santa Maria de Sena that I talked about would have been. This is going to become important to us right here. This is an island in between them that's called Sarah Bay. So keep that in mind. Also, we're going to have right over here is another island, even though it shows it as a bulge right here in the mainland, and it says Santa Cruz, and that's going to be where Guadalquivir is. So Guadalquivir, when they move from St. Simon's Island, they don't move into San Juan del Puerto here as the Spanish wanted. They just move right across to this other island, but eventually do move into this area. All right. So with this said, let's kind of look at what we've done archaeologically in both areas outside the missions as well as at one of the missions. All right. So at San Juan del Puerto, which is one of the ones I was going to talk about, but really at UNF, we've done really limited work there, just some shuttle testing to kind of expand the boundaries. Most of the work at San Juan del Puerto was done in the 60s. So I decided to just to forego that and talk about one of the outlying communities, Cerbay. So the priest named Pareja, okay, what we're also finding out through Aaron Broadwell's research on the Timucua language is that he writes a series of catechisms and grammars and other types of religious instructions within both Spanish and the Timucuan language. So we've always given him credit for being this great linguist. Aaron Broadwell is starting to realize that there are ghostwriters there, that there are indigenous people, there are probably indigenous Timucua who are actually writing a lot of this. He's probably just editing it and compiling it and getting credit for it. Okay, but he does write a letter. So what we're concerned with here is this letter he writes. He writes a letter in 1602 to the crown, and he says, from my doctrina here at San Juan, okay, I basically minister to 9 surrounding villages. So he does give this information. Okay, so he lists the 9, he kind of lists where they are, doesn't give us a whole lot of intrasite information. He says that most of them have churches or little chapels like we showed earlier. So what we're looking at here in 1602, this is an indigenous landscape. You have San Juan del Puerto, which has 1 priest living there. Okay, they still have their major council house. We have these 9 villages who are probably largely autonomous, even though they're supposed to be tied to the mission, paying tribute and so forth, but we're not sure exactly how that's really working out here. All right, so we've really been interested in trying to find these communities, all right, moving beyond kind of the convento and church area that really has always been the focus of most mission period archaeology. This may look a little complicated at first glance, but let me kind of walk you through this. This is the mouth of the St. Johns River right here. So if you're familiar with Jacksonville, this is where Mayport Naval Station is, all right? Just to the north is Fort George Island, which they would refer to as San Juan Island. This is where Alamacani is, the indigenous community that becomes San Juan del Puerto, all right? Over here is Gualaquini. This is the mission of San Buenaventura de Gualaquini that was originally on St. Simon's Island, Georgia, that moves down. Interesting, when it moves down, it becomes known as Santa Cruz de Gualaquini, and it's over here on Black Hammock Island. So these are the 2 missions. This is the long-standing mission. This is the relocated mission. We also know that we think we have at least 4 of the named Sifters identified. All right. So those are Cerbay, which we're going to talk about, which is right here on the island north of San Juan. And then there's Veracruz, which would have been right here adjacent to where Santa Cruz moved. And then we have San Pablo and San Mateo on the south side of the river. All right. So in 1998, we're really interested in Big Talbot Island. So we know on Big Talbot Island, there's supposed to be Cerbay. A lot of the documents refer to the island as Cerbay. William Jones, an avocational archaeologist in the 60s, was doing some work on the later plantations that are there. But he noted on some of the dirt roads, he found pieces of Majolica and what he said was Indian pottery. And he's the first person to suggest, hey, maybe Cerbay is here. So we had really known nothing about the south end right here of Big Talbot Island. So what we did is we got a grant and we did this shovel test survey. So we dug these, 550 shovel tests. All right. We got a lot of things going on here. We got a great shell ring here that dates to St. John's 2 times, about 1000 AD. We got a lot of things going on about 1200. But then on this side of the island, right here, the west or left-hand side of the island, we started to get a lot of materials that we felt dated to the 15 and early 1600s, kind of reinforcing our suspicion that this is where Cerbay was. All right. So a couple of important pottery types to know here. Of course, pots are not people. I understand that. But what we do have here is that we've done enough research in this area to know when this type of pottery dates to. And we are now totally convinced that the pottery that's being made in the Mocama area, particularly our area in the 1600s and late 1500s, is what we call San Pedro. Really distinctive ware. It's not really aesthetically great to look at. It's it can be cob marked, it can be kind of obliterated, it can have all these various roughened surfaces, it has grog tempering, all right? So when we start to find that, we know, hey, we have something that dates to that time period. The dates we have on it are probably from about 1450 to maybe the early 1600s. So when we find lots and lots of this, that suggests to us that we may have some sort of community that dates to that time period. And that's exactly what we have on the west side of Big Talbot Island. Sometime in the early 1600s, we do see this kind of shift to another pottery type. And this shift becomes a wholesale shift. We see the Esquimalt, who are on the Georgia coast. We see the Wally. We see the Mocama. We see the Yamasee. All begin to make some version of San Marcos, or in Georgia they call it Altamont, but it's the same thing. It's grit tempered, it's paddle stamped, it's really distinctive. You can tell the two apart. At Big Talbot Island, the site's called Armelino. We can get Cerebay. I'm going to refer to it as Cerebay. We have probably twice as much San Pedro as we do San Marcos, which is what we would expect since there's quite a longer occupation then. All right, so we dug our shovel test in 1998. So we have those 550 tests. We analyze all the pottery, we look at the distributions. We decide, hey, let's kind of do some larger tests in areas where we got substantial amounts of this late 1500, early 1600 pottery, or in a shovel test, or next to a shovel test that maybe had a unique feature. Well, as you can see here, there's a blue tarp here. This was a shovel test that we dug, and in digging it, we came across a really unique stain. What we have here is there is a plow zone. This area was plowed during the 1800s, late 1800s. It was a large plantation site. So there is this disturbance to the upper 30 or so centimeters, okay? But once you get below that, we started to get intact features. So below that, we had this huge, unique stain here, and we just couldn't tell within a 50 by 50 centimeters. So this was one of our primaries to come back to the sample. So we come back. So we thought we'd start out with a 1x2 to get an idea. Well, what we're going to see that one area is going to basically be expanded into a block over the next 2 field seasons. So we open up this larger block, which is going to consist of about 20 contiguous 1x2 meter units. All right. And what we start to find from there is this really great array of features. So this is a plan view map. So we're looking down on this area. This is below the plow zone. So we have all these really great features there. We have pits, we have some corn, we have all kinds of things that are going on. We have post holes, but we also had this really unique looking trench right here. So that shovel test I showed, which is right here, it had clipped this wall trench. So if I show you this photograph, I think you can still kind of see this wall trench right here. It's coming in right in it. We think this is the doorway. It's going around, and then there it is right in there. We have a few pits in here, and we had a really unique find that I'll talk about right here along the inside wall. So what it looks like is they dug a small little trench and then placed upright poles, wooden poles within that trench. All right. So we got this great kind of structure right here. We didn't expand it because there's some large trees over here to the west. All right. But what we're going to find right here is this complete pie. Okay. And it is a complete pie. So you see the bottom side of it right there intact, a giant Atlantic cockle shell. What happened was the upper part of it appears to have been hit by a plow, probably during the 1800s, kind of shattering it and then spreading the sherds all about. So when we put it together, we noticed that it is a San Marcos vessel. It's got this large giant Atlantic cockle that actually has this nice square little hole in it. And this hole right here is square, and you can see the lines etching where it's been cut out. This is not any type of predator hole or some sort of ding. This is actually a purposeful hole that is cut into it. We've gotten corn. So we have about 6 radiocarbon dates, 3 or 4 of them are on corn, some on pottery, both San Marcos pottery and San Pedro pottery. All of these, when we do the 2 sigma, they are no later than 1630. All right, so 98% probability that these basically date to before 1630. So what we think we have here, based on what we find in a couple of years, is probably going to be an area of the site that dates to the 1580, early 1600 time frame. All right, so here's the map. Here we are right down here. This is what we dug in 1998, 99. We called it Area AB. The blue right here represents kind of what the structure we think would look like, relative speaking. So over the next, 22 years or so, I got involved in other projects, doing other things. When we're getting into the late 2019, started thinking about, we really wanted to understand the landscape of northeastern Florida when the French and the Spanish first arrived in 1560. Where are the indigenous communities? What do these indigenous communities really look like? What is their reaction and responses in terms of daily practices from European contact, colonization, and missionization? So I decided, let's go back and find one of these really good communities that dates to this period and try to do more excavations. So we chose Sarah Bay based on what we found in 1998. To really understand what the community looks like, we decided we have to open up broad areas. 1x2s or 2x2 meter blocks aren't going to do it. So we decided to come back to where we were. When we had dug this here in 1998 and 99, we'd actually dug a 1x3 and a 1x1 over here in the midden area. So we thought, okay, let's go ahead and try to expand this area right here. It had been 22 years. This was really prior to us having GPS coordinates. So we had some areas, so we thought we could piecemeal exactly where it was. We were close. We thought that it was going to be right over here, but it actually we ended up hitting it with our units, which in a way is even better because now we know exactly where it is. So what we did is in 2020, we're going to dig this block C right here. Then in 2021, we dig this extension to it. We dig block D and we dig block E. So what we have now currently, as of right now, we've looked at an area that's roughly 40 meters wide and about 60 meters kind of north-south, all right? There are going to be shovel tests sprinkled throughout here. But just within this area of the site, we have really a pretty broad area open up. I think if you look at it, we basically, in this area, we've dug a 6-foot wide trench the length of a football field, all right? We've broken it up into different kind of areas, but now we have this wider view. So we thought, okay, can we find more structures? Can we find activity areas? What can we find within this community? So this is going to be what we call Block C. So this was scheduled for the summer of 2020. It got postponed due to COVID. UNF allowed us in the fall to actually have a field school, much fewer students wearing masks, socially spaced, socially distanced, all that. So we dug it out. So this right here is going to be 22 contiguous 1x2s, all right? So here you can see we're just getting down, just starting to get to the base of the plow zone, kind of looking for that interface so we can start seeing features, cultural features that still may be intact. So this would be the 2021. All right, so the way that this is oriented, this one is looking east and this one is looking north. So this area right here is actually this area right in here. So we're just basically coming off and adding on to it. We had found a few features right here along this wall, so we wanted to expand them just a little bit more to see, hey, what were they? All right, so this is it. So this is another plan view map. So we're looking down at it. This right here is the 2020 trench we call Block C. And this was the 2021 expansion that we call Block C extension. We initially had a little bulk in between them just to separate it. And then at the very end, we took that out. All right. So we got a lot going on here. A lot of these are stains of various types. Some of them end up being just maybe dips in the plow zone. Some of them maybe gopher tortoise furrows. Some are various things, but some of them are clearly cultural. We have a couple nice hearts. But what we end up finding are these great post holes. And we have one there. We have one there. We have one there. There. And then these last two, we ran out of time, so we haven't excavated them, but we have a stain there and another one right there. So those are the first things we're going to do this summer is to go back, dig that back up, and then actually cross-section them. All the other ones, we've actually drawn them in plan, cross-section them, and taken them out. And they have great post profiles. All right, so what we're looking at here, just based on this temporary kind of projection, preliminary, it's maybe 20 meters in diameter. So what we hope is maybe this could be the council house, the political center of the community. Again, highly tentative, really speculation at this point in time, but it really looks like we have a large structure. These are below the plow zone. We don't have any plantation era material. All the stuff coming out of here is all dating to 1580s, 1620 maybe a little earlier than that in places. All right, so again, Here are these post holes just to give you an idea. I just selected 3 of them, but the others are just as good. Really nice, deep. Here we go. UNF students out there kind of, being contortionists, drawing and mapping them, doing all this great recording for them. We excavated half of them in the field. The other half we bagged for flotation and fine screen processing, which we're involved in right now. So what we have then potentially is we have this structure here. We have potentially a larger structure right here. What's kind of interesting, based on our shovel testing over here, there's not a lot in this area. So we were wondering, could this be a structure? Maybe an elite structure. Wall trenches aren't known for this area. We also then have this larger structure. Could it be the council house? Could this area in here be maybe a plaza, which is kind of the structure the documents allude to? So we're going to be back again this summer to really try to open up more of this, to get more of this, to get its overall size. We want to make sure we hit the center of it. We would hope to find evidence of a fire and things along those sorts. So this is where we're kind of focusing right now. Real quick, so I can get to the other side. We're getting lots of great pottery out of there. I mean, really, really areas with big pieces, nice stuff. Again, the kind of indigenous first Mocama pottery, San Pedro to the left, the later San Marcos to the right. Again, San Pedro probably outnumbers San Marcos 2-to-1. So we probably have, 3,000 San Pedro church, 1,800, 1,700 San Marcos church. We are getting clonaware. This kind of surprised us. A lot of people said, oh, clonaware, that's only made really at the mission sites themselves, and it's really made for the priests who are using them. We're getting them here within this completely indigenous site, all right? Again, this is not part of a doctrina. This is supposedly one of the visitas that he would have visited. So we get this great clonaware red pottery. So these are plate marleys or brims to these kind of plates, really shallow bowls. These are nice little handles. That's probably a large pitcher kind of handle. We're also getting pipes. So these are smoking pipes. These are indigenous made smoking pipes. This one here, got a little spur on it, really nice. This one's great. This one, unfortunately, we don't have all of it, but these are known for other areas, particularly along the Georgia coast a little earlier, is that this would have had a human face on it. And this right here is, you can see this is the back part where the stem is. This is the front of this one. This would represent an ear, and that's an ear spool. And so the front part of the bowl would have actually been the face. I think right now we have close to 70 pieces of Spanish olive jar. We have a scabbard tip that more experts that are historic artifact based says it appears to be Spanish. We weren't sure it's Spanish or French. We also got Mexican red painted pottery. So this is pottery that would have been made in Mexico and brought to this area. We also got, surprisingly for this early time, is a handful of a Megalica. Again, something that people think mainly at the mission sites. But we have it here. We have 2 different types, Sevilla blue on blue and San Luis blue on white. Both of these are early production dates. So these are like pre-1630, which goes along with our radiocarbon dates, which goes along with everything we seem to have, at the site. I think we need to keep in mind, I think sometimes we privilege the origins of materials instead of how they were used. So yeah, everyone gets excited with these are European artifacts, but they're being used within Native American context. So that's really where we're working from. I think really a big part of our research is kind of to center the indigenous people within the colonization process and not look at it as it's mostly done kind of through colonial eyes and through colonial terminology. So for us, if you've ever seen kind of a Timucuan village, you get that palisaded wall around it. That seems to be totally bogus. This kind of appears to be based on shovel tests we've done here at 2 or 3 other sites. That these are really dispersed over broad areas, that it probably did not have a real strong concentration, that it had a central area with a council house, maybe elites living in that area, then others were in these little clearing areas with small gardens. We have great dates on corn. All the corn that we have dated throughout this area, and this is going to be the same, said the same for the Georgia coast, all corn that we have when we do 2 sigma standard deviation, it's all post 1450. So they're not growing corn in this area until the second half of the 15th century. All right. So that's the work that we're currently doing now. The early part of the early times of missions, what's interaction that's going on among different indigenous people in terms of their social networks, how are the Spanish fitting into that? So that's kind of what we're working on now, looking at that kind of 1580, 1620 time frame. We do know, and I mentioned this earlier, that based on documents, all those visitas are gone by mid 1620, 1630 at the latest. And they probably start, they're eliminated probably one by one and not all at one time, probably due to depopulation for various reasons. All right, so hopefully everyone's doing okay about this. I think I can get through this other one here in the next 15 minutes or so. So let's kind of backtrack. Here is Port George Island in San Juan del Puerto, the main mission. Okay, this is probably one of the longest lasting missions in La Florida outside, the gates of St. Augustine. This is Big Talbot Island. This is where Sarabay was, which we think is one of the early communities that was tied to Alamacani here at San Juan. All right. Then we have Santa Cruz. All right. So this is right here. This is the community that I talked about earlier that had been on St. Simon's Island, Georgia. Once we see the English start really raiding areas for indigenous slaves, either to go back, take them back to the Carolina colony or ship them to the Caribbean. All right. We also see French corsairs starting to hit them. So basically in 1684, they move south along with the other Wallis missions that are in that area or a little farther to the north. All right. So we go back right here. There's this little boot right here. Kind of keep that landform in mind as we move forward. Here's that little boot right here. So this is another site. The first site we worked on, I should have mentioned this, of Sarabay, it's on state lands. So it is Big Talbot Island State Park, right? There are a few out parcels in there that are private properties. Most of those we have permission as well. This is all going to be state. Right here is going to be a city boat ramp that's been incorporated into the national park. So the Park Service was interested in just getting some managerial information about what's out there, timeframes, and all of that. We were suspecting that there could be mission period stuff in this area, or at least contact period stuff in this area. So we did here probably close to 800 shovel tests. There's still this little void right here. But what we end up finding in doing this, again, UNF students digging away, is we think we have Veracruz. So we think we have another one of those visitas that would have been contemporaneous with Sarabay. We know that this is in existence as late as 1627. There's a big incident that goes on there, but it's abandoned by 1630. So this is going to be a contact village. We don't know the contact village's name, the indigenous name, but it appears to be known as Veracruz after 1587. We found the same materials that we were kind of finding at Sarabay. We have a hawk's bell, okay, or a Saturn bell. So these would have been for falconry. This probably dates to the late 1500s. We have small amounts of olive jar. So we have a nice little, again, just prior to contact, and shortly thereafter over in this area. Over in this area, we think we have Santa Cruz. All right, so this is the relocated mission. So what's interesting is Guadaluquini is its name. It's called San Buenaventura de Guadaluquini when it's there. When they move down here, it becomes Santa Cruz y San Buenaventura de Guadaluquini, but eventually Santa Buenaventura is eliminated, so it becomes Santa Cruz. And the reason for this is probably this area is already known to the Spanish as Vera or Santa Cruz, so they just incorporate that name. This community had been abandoned by maybe 50 years, so it's not there. So this is an unoccupied island when they move into this area. What we do know is that this is going to be the core area of Guadaluquini, but we do see little households probably splattered throughout here as well, but there's really small ones that date to that time period. All right. So if we look at this area right here and kind of blow it up, here it is. So we have all these shovel tests that were dug, again, trying to get some information for the National Park Service in terms So at one time they were thinking about opening this area up. They wanted to do more work here with the boat ramp, but based on what we find, things change. So what we have here is kind of the core area of San Buenaventura or Santa Cruz de Guadalquivir. And we think this is probably where the church is. Shovel test right along here basically found human remains going up under the road. In with it was a lot of clay, and that's kind of a classic marker for burials that have been placed under the clay floor of churches. So we stopped immediately. Here's on a nice little high spot, but it looks like the road goes right through it. So the area that we ended up concentrating on is going to be this area right here. We're going to call it Block C, and it's going to be Structure 1. All right. So here we are in 2007, kind of digging some of the shovel tests through this area, which has been kind of a cleared area in which there had been a fish camp there. There's kind of a boat ramp there. So we're plugging away. And at the very end of the 2007 field season, this shovel test right here had produced olive jar and San Marcos pottery, which is what we would expect to find for this later mission. No San Pedro here at all. It's all in the other area that's Veracruz. So it's a nice little separation. So based on this right here in 2007, we dug these two units. So we did this little L-shaped unit the very last week, got them in at the last moment just to get some basic information. So what we had found in here are some nice features that came here and here. So we only got them partially. So we recorded them, we excavated them, we backfilled, and then we weren't able to get back until 2 years later. So 2 years later, those units have been backfilled. We dug this out here because it had been lined with a tarp, and then we started to expand. So here we are expanding this area. All right. So we go back to this one just to orient you. That way there is north. So this way here is east. So when we go to this one, this way is east and that's north. So I was digging in that unit there. All right. So that means there's that shovel test we saw. This is where the unit had been done before. And so we built upon this. And what you start to see are these features here. And these are great features. So we have a series of them. This one here and this one here, the northern parts of them were encountered in earlier units. But what we're going to see here is that this is an alignment. And this is going to form to a structure. These are great features. You're going to see how great they are in a couple of minutes. All right. This one here, you can actually see that it's all shell here, but then that area right there is where there was a post that probably was pulled out. All right. So this is that same area as we begin to kind of cross section. This one here, we haven't gotten to the center of it yet. These here, we're just taking them as far as the walls will allow us. These here, there's a thin little bulk right there because that's already been excavated out. So we wanted to be able to observe a profile, and there they are. So here are these outer ones. You can see these nice little posts hold here, and then the mold right here where it was right here. In these, we're getting, it's not just backfilled. I mean, they're putting garbage in there, mostly shell-midden garbage. So these post holes are full of all these great artifacts. So you got these great big pieces of San Marcos pottery. We're getting Majolica here. What's different here at Cerro Bay, we had all these early types Majolica. Here at Guadalquivir, they're all late types. So these are all have production that start earliest in 1650. Here's Puebla polychrome. All right. So what started out as doing this little area here basically gets expanded the next few years. So we're there in 2009 with just those, about 6 of them. Then we do another 20, another 20. So it gets bigger and bigger. So eventually it's this block C. We eventually come back in 2015 and add these here. So what we're looking at are, 94 units, 82 of them, which are 1 by 2. So we've, again, opened up a really broad area, but this has been done over successive field seasons, all right, or at least parts of field season. Sometimes we only came out for a week or two when we're working at Veracruz or on other sites, all right? So this is just kind of some photographs here of us starting to expand the area. Again, As you can see with these strings, they're being taken out in 1 by 2 meter units. So we're taking them out in much smaller horizontal areas and just kind of expanding. So as we expanded to the east, to the west of our initial line, we got another row. There's one there, one there, one there, boom, boom, and boom. So we have this line here. This right here, this little L from the solid line up to there, that's the initial one that we had found that we showed earlier. This is what we had found in 2007 and 2009, was this little L. So we came in, dug a little trench in the backfill of that block and just expanded. All right. And so here is where we dug out a little bit of the previous backfill block, and we're starting to basically cross-section these. We're getting them in plan view, then we're cutting them in half. What we're finding out is there's not a lot of hardware. There's not a lot of nails. So this was probably dismantled, or at least they scavenged all the nails and probably took them with them when they moved to San Juan del Puerto. So remember, the history of this community is that it's here 12 years. It moves from St. Simon's Island, it's here 12 years, and then from here, they're going to move to San Juan del Puerto, which is interesting. They don't move until San Juan del Puerto until the Holata, the chief at San Juan, dies, and the chief who's here is going to become the head chief. So they decide to move over to San Juan del Puerto. And in the time in between, they were building a council house, a second council house at San Juan del Puerto, so that it would be ready for when they do make the move. So they probably tried to take as much of the hardware from these earlier buildings as they could and use them. So here we go. 18 post holes. They range in size from 18 to 28 inches, depth from 14 to 35. We see kind of two types of them. Really large, probably support posts running down 2 rows in the center, and then smaller ones around the perimeter. But again, they're putting these in place. They're putting shelving in, tamping that down, probably providing stability for the post and maybe sweetening the soil. Maybe it's helping to deter insects as well. But they're really large, stable posts within the interior. And so again, just some really classic looking post holes. So here's the bigger one in the center part. These are the more like the ones that are around the perimeter of the structure. This is one of the central big ones as well. We got lucky here. Part of the pine post is still intact, so we were able to see that. Here's another, this is one of my favorites. So this is another huge one again. Big post hole. Here's the post. There's the fill that was put into place. All right. So this is what it looks like in terms of our drawing. So again, what we have here is this is the part right here from here to there. We had the first 2 years, that little L. And then we found that area we just showed, and then eventually we found more. We didn't get this corner here because there are trees right there in the way. All right, but it's got a great kind of footprint. It's incredible. These are clearly posts. These 2 here, this one here, and these 2 here. So these 6 right down the middle. These are the really huge ones that were probably weight bearing. The other interesting thing we found is that within this area right here, this kind of yellow and kind of light orange color, that's daub. We're getting lots of daub in these units, but really none in these units, suggesting this is a 2-room structure. So we're looking at roughly probably 10 meters by 7 meters, then maybe a room here that's 6 by 7 and 4 by 7. All right, and this smaller one appears to have had daub walls. All right, but the other one was open. In fact, we have parts and other things suggested that maybe this was more open remodel-like that they were using for cooking and other things, because we have pits. We have a nice little shell midden that's running right along here. We eventually did excavate that, and so we have this great mission period shell midden that's here with all this great faunal material and other subsistence material. And then kind of below it and then off more to the west was a woodland period. So we have really no contamination from earlier contact activities. Any kind of earlier activity we have is 800 to 1,000 years earlier. So these are areas where we had these harsher cooking kind of areas. These are going to be areas where we did find religious related artifacts. All right. So here you can see this is going to be, there's a black midden right in here. That's the mission period midden. And then there's this other midden below it that is going to be clearly much earlier in time, much different kinds of materials. All right. So what we are getting from that Gualaquina, that 1684, 1696, this is great to have a window that's that small, great temporal resolution. We're getting corn, more corn than we normally get on sites. We're getting peach pits, which are brought by the Spanish. We're getting a small amount of pig bones. We have one cow bone. But when you look at this, they are still living an indigenous life. They're still collecting oysters, they're fishing tremendously, they're hunting deer. So we see a real strong subsistence geared towards traditional things. We still see a lot of use of bone and shell tools as well. Right? So just kind of winding it down here with some of the pottery. Again, it's all going to be this later San Marcos pottery that we would expect. We're getting colonial ware, again, much more colonial ware than we got at Sarabay. But here's another pitcher handle. This is another red film plate marley. All right. We're getting large amounts of olive jar. We're getting a variety of Majolica, much later Majolica pieces, whether it's San Luis polychrome, Abo polychrome, Asilla polychrome. We're getting beads. We actually, one of the household areas, it looks like we got a rosary bead, another faceted bead right here, calling the lepos that are here. This one here actually was gold. So we're getting not a large collection, but maybe 15 beads in the area. We are getting things that were a little surprising. We are getting gun flints. So we know at this point in time, probably with everything that's going on with the French Corsairs, with British slave raiding going on, that the indigenous groups that are here are probably outfitted with at least a few guns. So we do have those here. We have gaming pieces, which are nice to find. We also have kaolin pipe stems and pipe bowls that are probably coming from British-related areas than the Spanish. So these are probably not getting directly from the British, but there are old origins are there. Again, these European-based artifacts are becoming part of the indigenous materials that are being used by indigenous people. Here are a couple of the crosses that we found. This large Greek cross, this one here, it says, this text says Immaculate Conception. On one side, it says Original Sin in Latin. So it's kind of nice to have those in there as well. We got a few rings. So this is actually the same ring. It's got this braided, these are finger rings, but it's Sacred Heart of Jesus ring. So you can see the little flames coming off and the heart that's here. Here's another ring that we found, a little brass ring. Rochelle Marinan at the Pali and the Tallahassee area found this exact same ring there as well. So I'm going to end it there. I think we can still see a lot of the indigenous aspects of people still within their culture, still dominates their culture even after 100 years of missionization. So I think our research is still ongoing in these areas, so hopefully we can expand upon them. I just want to give you just a brief flavor for what we're finding, some of the basic interpretations we're starting to make at this point in time. A lot of people are involved in this, from the national park to Mocama Preserve to the state park, Friends of Talbot Island, the Mocama Park Foundation, Land Trust, individual families have helped out. But most of all, it's the UNF students and volunteers and students and volunteers from so many different areas who come out there and make these projects a success. Sometimes I feel like I get to be a mouthpiece for all this great work that kind of goes on among at UNF. And just last, I end with the this kind of land acknowledgement that we are kind of doing our research with great respect in lands that really belong to the Mocama Missions. But we do see Wally moving into the area, Yamasee, and others. All right. So with that, I think I am going to stop sharing